From the beginning and through Alpha City's decades of evolution, all major medical services for residents were handled off-site through state-sponsored plans, which were made available to all residents. Other than several well-stocked emergency first aid stations located at various locations throughout the complex, anything that required professional medical attention was handled externally by the surrounding community's medical facilities. One resident writes to a friend, quote, "Everyone is trained in basic first aid, and there are also some residents who happen to have a more extensive background in these skills. The company always pays for their recertification when it comes due, and surprisingly, there are even a few doctors on site. One is Swedish, two are Americans, another from India, and the last one is from North Korea. They all have different reasons for giving up their practices and joining the Alpha City project, and they are all clearly very committed to the cooperativist philosophy. All of them have their own very interesting stories, but I really have to say that this is also true of virtually everyone here in Alpha City. There are plenty of cooperatists from around the globe who have applied to be residents. We can afford to be, and are, very particular about who we choose to be residents. As always, commitment to the long-term goals of the project is essential. The ability to get along with fellow residents and work as a team are also essential qualities. People who will work together and bond as a group and community, and who are willing and eager to pitch in and get things done when needed, fit in here very well. Anyway, these doctors do their workforce rotations just like everybody else. In fact, they wouldn't have it any other way. But they are also always in demand for their medical advice. It's like they have their own little practice going on here. Of course, there is no money involved, and they don't get any special privileges for their services. They just advise people whenever occasions arise, and they handle whatever minor emergencies may occur on site. They never seem to mind. In fact, it appears as though they enjoy being called upon for their expertise. They consult with one another and do the best they can with whatever they are presented with. If they can reasonably handle the situation, then they do, with whatever limited resources are available. If it requires more sophisticated equipment or techniques, then they recommend outside sources. They do all of this for free, setting a great example. But I honestly have to say that everyone does. It's just that kind of community. Everyone has their talents and skills, and they share them with the rest of the community, no matter what it is. No one is in competition. Everyone works together. Sometimes mistakes are made, and you might get kidded about it for a while by your friends, but no one loses their job or their residency. We just all pull together and fix whatever it was. There's a strong feeling of not wanting to let the team down, not because of consequences, but because they are your friends, and they're counting on you." End quote. Alpha City eventually reached a stage in its growth where it began constructing an on-site medical facility. This was the most ambitious project of all. It would boast the latest and greatest technical equipment of that era. This had always been a long-term plan of the Alpha City project from the very beginning, and it was always assumed to be one of the final stages of the project, completely contingent on the rest of the project going well. Its attainment was considered by the community to represent an undeniable verification of Alpha City's success. One resident doctor recalls, quote, "This has always been a questionable aspect of the cooperative system from the beginning. Would a volunteer medical community flourish without being incorporated into the workforce? Would it be sustainable and still be able to deliver high-quality care?" Once the facility was completed, medical students and experienced veterans from around the globe were filling out their online applications to become future residents of Alpha City. Many of these veterans had established reputations in their fields. They were frustrated with the fact that the medical profession had become more of a business than a science or an art. They were fed up with all the red tape and liabilities and administrative mandates. They were frustrated with the fact that it had become more and more bureaucratic, simply another huge corporate machine run for profit. These were individuals already drawn to the ideals of a cooperativist system. End quote. Another resident writes to an outside friend and former colleague, quote, "The medical staff here has grown and the facility is very well equipped. We have the ability to do x-rays and minor surgeries. Also, a dental department is in the works. There are more than enough medical staff members on board now, so there's always an abundance of qualified personnel hanging out at the facility attending to patient needs. It is not an issue for us to put in our fair share of time in the regular workforce segments. It doesn't compromise our ability to participate in and handle the caseload at the medical facility. Oddly enough, it is often a welcome break and a nice change of pace from the time I spend at the medical facility, which is generally far greater than the time I spend in the workforce. The medical staff could all be making respectable money working in the outside world, but obviously we aren't doing it for the money. Here, there is no red tape or complicated bureaucracy, nor is there any charge to the patients. Everyone on the medical staff helps each other out and supports each other. When someone has a medical problem, we help them out. That's all there is to it. Victims of serious illness or injuries, we transport to the nearest outside hospitals. We can handle most things very well right here on site, but we don't have the ability to accommodate patients who need extended long-term care, although we're getting there." End quote. A resident surgeon writes, quote, "More and more minor surgeries are being performed here. Some patients are choosing to come here from the outside world because of the reputation we are building. Residents are always our main priority, but for the most part, residents tend to be healthy. So we've opened up our services to more outsiders. This keeps us busy doing what we enjoy. We provide our services to non-residents for a small fee, which is generally handled by the insurance plans. This fee, like all money made from resident services, goes to support the Alpha City community, not to us individually. This makes us unique in terms of medical care and services in the world today. The staff has a wonderful joint working relationship. Anyone who has an interest in being involved in a particular case can participate. Each has their own specialty, but we don't limit ourselves to them. It isn't unusual for someone like me to take part in a dental procedure under the tutelage of one of the resident dentists, and vice versa. And another thing that's great here is that I get to be involved with all the equipment as well. I'm not just looking at results all the time. I'm actually involved in doing the x-rays or whatever else is necessary. We're involved with every aspect of patient care. We have also developed a very cooperative working relationship with the outside medical community. We regularly have dialogues with many major hospitals in Belgium and internationally as well. And during the course of these dialogues, whenever we exchange information, my colleagues and I have all commented about how we are always questioned about our life here in Alpha City. They always want to know what it's like to live and practice here. They're so curious. This place has attracted some very respected doctors who prefer the money-free, bureaucracy-free environment." End quote. Later we learn from this same resident, quote, "We've begun a medical internship program here for those wishing to enter and explore the medical sciences. We're becoming somewhat famous as a first choice for many students in this area. And we've become quite successful at including many aspects of the medical sciences into quite a few of the resort attractions." End quote. Alpha City residents began to develop their own athletic teams, clubs, and tournaments. At first, this was on a very small scale and done very much like semi-organized pickup matches. But as the population and interest grew, more teams were formed and more formally organized seasons were planned. One resident writes this to a friend, quote, "You asked me about the sports here. They are growing all the time. There are all kinds of leagues you can get involved with at varying levels. The more skilled players tend to form their own teams and leagues, challenging other such formed teams. But there's plenty of opportunity for anyone interested to join a sport group or club or play for fun with those having similar interests and skill levels. Pickup games are always going on that anyone can get involved with. There are leagues for tennis, fencing, football, rugby, baseball, and cricket. There is even a group starting a league for American football. Some of our higher level league teams have even become proficient enough to compete in lower level semi-professional leagues outside of Alpha City. They rarely finish with anything even close to a winning record, but for them, just being good enough to legitimately compete at that level is quite satisfying. In Alpha City, these teams are revered, and whenever they play in any outside professional matches, they are cheered on and well supported by the residents. The members of these teams are still members of the workforce, same as any other resident in the city. They are not exempt from performing their workforce duties. They are not given any special privilege status with regard to the workforce. However, certain exceptions agreed upon by the workforce population as a whole are granted when any of these teams have to travel to compete in outside competitions. Everyone has agreed that this is great for the image of Alpha City. Except for those few exceptions, these team players attain their accomplishments by devoting their free time to their sport. There are no special perks involved other than the fan support and local notoriety they achieve. And yes, they are involved in fashioning their own equipment and chip in to do their part to maintain the facilities as well. End quote. As Alpha City became more metropolitan, one of the residents writes this, quote, "In the city, there are film groups, theater groups, music groups, art groups, and sports groups. Many of these groups and their functions have worked their way into staple attractions in Alpha City. The residents and their internal culture has become an attraction in and of itself." End quote. The resort side continued to draw and thrill thousands of visitors, but the definition of Alpha City began to evolve from resort to urban center. And this new status afforded more and more credibility and influence with regard to its cooperatist economy and philosophy. It was singularly unique. People were curious. People were intrigued. It posed no threat to the established ideologies, commerce, or political systems. It was an oddity. As it grew, the capitalists were trying to figure out a way to capitalize on its success, as opposed to trying to hinder it. They saw money signs and wanted to capture a share of the market. So Alpha City's stature grew. One could not think of Belgium without thinking of Alpha City, and vice versa. Belgium and its people became very proud of this new international gem and supported its continual growth and fame. One resident conveys this sentiment, quote, "Residents are generally happy. Our needs are taken care of by our cooperative efforts. We are committed to this way of life and always delight in sharing this experience with outsiders. Guests are generally happy for the same reasons. They too forget all of their financial cares and woes and experience an atmosphere designed for the enjoyment of life." End quote. The surrounding communities also benefited. Guests often ventured outside of the resort to explore some Belgian culture, and this was a boon to Belgian tourism. This made the government very happy. The project was a huge success and remained that way for decades. Another resident writes to a friend, quote, "Some come for the sports, some come for the arts, some come for the health, some come for the social freedom and interaction, some come for the experience of how life could be if society were unshackled from social strata and the burdens of financial profits and financial feasibility." End quote. Alpha City became a mecca for talented and gifted scientists, architects, and engineers. Artists flourished here as well. It became one of the most cosmopolitan and most visited cities in the world.